Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, the tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. Today, we've got an interesting gentleman here to kind of share his story and tell us a little bit about what he's doing. We've got John Ensley. John is the owner of Cruise and Learn Sailing International. And what they're doing, I've had some time to do a little research before we got on this call. What they're doing is quite unique and definitely fits in the kind of the adventure travel space. So I asked him to come on to the show and tell us a little bit about what's going on. John, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here.
So great to be here. Thanks for having me, Jason.
So John, real quick, where are you right now? Where are we chatting with you from?
Right now, at this moment, I am in La Paz, Mexico, down on the southern tip of the Baja Peninsula.
All right, very cool. And how much time do you spend in La Paz typically in a year?
So we're usually down here, let's say, from November through about April. So six, 7 months a year.
Oh, nice. Well, we're recording this in kind of late March. I'm not sure when people are going to be listening to it, but what's the weather like in late March in La Paz, Mexico?
Well, the weather in La Paz, Mexico, pretty much all winter long could be pretty much described as perfect. So we're, usually in the mid 70s to mid 80s and light breezes and clear blue sunny skies. So that's why I'm here in the winter.
Yeah, no,
and that's pretty much what we got outside today.
Very cool. And I'm not that familiar with the area. I kind of had a feeling you were going to say that. And I'm curious, what is it? Does it get warm? And do you leave in the summer because the weather is unfavorable there? Or is it just because it's so nice in other places?
So I would describe the summer here as murderously hot.
Okay.
So it's pretty
no
pretty
more explanation
common.
Is needed.
Yeah, exactly. It's very, very hot.
Made it
right?
We're very clear. So
the whole Baja Peninsula is basically the Sonoran
John, before
desert.
we, I don't want to spend the whole conversation speaking about what's that?
Oh, I was saying the Baja Peninsula is basically Sonoran desert. So in the summer months, it is very hot.
Yep. I lived in Arizona for quite a while, and I'm sure it's, and you probably have a little bit of moderating effect from the ocean, but still it's, it gets really, really hot in that part of the world. So I can appreciate why you leave. Before we get into too much of kind of what you're doing now, I want to hear what got you to where you are now. So fill in the gap between kind of where you started. We can go back as far as you feel like it's necessary. Give our listeners kind of an idea, how did you get involved in what you're doing? And then we'll talk a little bit more about what you're actually doing. So how far back do you want to go?
Well, we can very briefly go back to 11 years old. That's when I actually learned how to sail the first time at a summer camp in Central Oregon on little Sunfish single sail little sailboat. So I guess you could say it kind of started there. But really we flash forward to about 2004 or 5, and a friend invited me to the Portland Boat Show, and that's it was all smooth sailing, so to speak, from that point.
So let's dig into the 11-year-old thing, because that's actually pretty cool. I wonder about, your parents and what motivated them to get you on the water at the age of 11. What was going on in your world when you were 11 that you ended up learning to sail?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in rural Southern Oregon, country boy, stomping around the woods and playing in the rivers in Southern Oregon. My dad was always fascinated with sailboats. He never actually owned a sailboat, but he was fascinated with it, and he had magazines and stuff around the house all the time, was always talking about it. So I think I kind of took an interest that way. And I grew up Seventh-day Adventist, and there was a Seventh-day Adventist youth camp that folks would send us to every summer for a week. And so one summer when I was 11, I decided I was going to take sailing for my week. And so that's, we went up there for a week and spent a week sailing little sailboats on Big Lake in Central Oregon, and had a blast.
That's very, very cool. What was there a defining moment when you were doing that, yeah, I want to keep doing this? Or do you have any kind of memories of that experience that you think it maybe impacted, maybe in hindsight, looking back at it, you can say, oh yeah, that was the moment, or that's what happened?
What I remember most about it is it was a real confidence builder for me. I was at 10 years old. I was a pretty timid kid. I was a scrawny little thing, and I was kind of afraid of a lot of stuff. And I remember going up to camp for that week and being very afraid of these boats and the water and just all of it. But I had an absolute blast, right? I just loved it. Flipped those little sunfish over multiple times, landed in the water, figured out, well, okay, that's not so scary. That's actually a lot of fun. And so that's what I remember the most is coming out of that experience just much more confident on and around the water than I was going into it. So, and I think that definitely took me in a direction towards the water, right? Went on to do whitewater rafting in Southern Oregon as a teenager, and a lot of that kind of thing as well.
I get that. I'm kind of envisioning, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know anything about it, but I'm envisioning you out there as an 11-year-old in your own boat. I mean, belongs to the camp or whatever, but you actually have the opportunity to run the boat yourself, right? That's the whole point, right?
Yeah, exactly. There were usually pairs of us on the boat, but yeah, essentially, we were out there. They give you a little basic instruction, but it's mostly, here's the pointy end, here's the flat end, here's the wind, go. It's a lot of fun.
It's actually pretty cool, because I can imagine from, the 11-year-old perspective, like you said, you felt a little intimidated going into it. I imagine it's kind of like, for a kid to do something that's kind of on an adult level without an adult sitting right next to you, almost like driving a car around the block without your parents in the car with you. Or, I've heard stories of, younger people, getting into aviation and doing their first solo flight. I did my first solo flight in a hot air balloon when I was 14. And it was, looking back at it, I'm like, holy cow, that was a big confidence builder. At the time, I was just kind of, absorbed in the whole thing. But it's, I can see being out on the water yourself without an adult in the boat. And yeah, that's very cool. Very cool.
Well, that's about that age, right, where you start starting to take steps towards independence. 10, 11, 12 years old, where you're starting to get out and do things kind of without an adult sitting right next to you, and have those experiences. Yeah, I think it's a cool part of life.
What do you remember? Do you remember your parents' attitude about it? Maybe before you went or after you got back and you were sharing your stories, do you have any memories of kind of how they responded? Were they, super supportive? Or, was there a difference between mom and dad? What was that like?
Yeah, no, my folks were always super supportive. I have a brother and a sister, and we are all as different as three people can be. And I attribute that to my folks, right? They just encouraged us to explore whatever we wanted to be at that point in time. And I think that's why we all turned out so differently, is that we each kind of went our own path and became who we were supposed to be. I kid with people all the time that I'm not really kidding. I had just a totally idyllic childhood. We were constantly camping, hiking, rafting, backpacking, just out in nature all the time. And my folks were always just super supportive of whatever we wanted to pursue, personally, right? They encouraged that. We didn't have a lot of resources, mind you. So, it wasn't an unfettered go do whatever you want to do, but it was, if we took an interest in sailing, for instance, then, we were going to do summer camp anyway. So we make sure sailing happened during summer camp, or, those kinds of things. So I just had a fantastic childhood, again, stomping around the woods of Southern Oregon growing up.
It's very curious. I'm curious, like, what did your parents do? Like, what was your dad doing? Like, he was obviously kind of into the outdoors, kind of adventurous, but like, I suspect you're going to tell me he was something that would be a surprise. I don't know. What did he do? What was he doing when you were young?
So yeah, always into the outdoor thing. I mean, I've seen pictures when I was just a tiny little thing, with their, old square Winnebago, right out in the desert in California. So always out camping and doing that kind of thing. Uh, they're retired now. Of course, they do the snowbird thing. They go to Arizona in the winter and they live in Montana in the summer.
Perfect.
But dad's a retired truck driver. He drove truck for 40 years or so. And mom did different things, kind of office work and some restaurant stuff, but mostly she what I remember, she was home with us. One of the unique things with both my folks, in particular my mom, is that so paying for private Seventh-day Adventist schools was kind of a thing, right? How to figure that out. So my dad converted an area of our home into a certified commercial bakery. And so we ran a family bakery out of the house when we were kids, and that's how they paid our tuition, was with the bakery. And so flash forward, I go to boarding school, Seventh-day Adventist boarding school at my freshman year in high school. I'm 14 years old, and the area director finds out that I've been working in the family bakery for the last several years. And so at 14 years old, they make me the baker for the whole school, right? I did now, frankly, I hated the job. I had to get up at like 3:30 in the morning to go to work. But I took over baking all the breads, cookies, everything for the school there for a little while. So that whole thing has I went on to actually open a bakery for a short time as an adult too. So that whole bakery thing kind of followed me through as well.
Because I was going to ask, what were those, those skill sets or those memories that kind of carried into the future? Because they typically do. And it sounds like that was one of them. And also just kind of the business, right? I mean, I think that when kids are exposed to a business in the home or their parents' business on some level, as opposed to, I don't know what my dad does. He just leaves and comes back at the end of the day. Or I don't know what my mom does. She's doing something, but I don't understand it. When kids are involved in figuring out how to make money for tuition, or figuring out how to, as a family, do those things, I think that can be pretty useful. Would you think? I mean,
for sure. So, my job, I don't know, I was maybe 11, 12, 13. My job was we ground all the whole wheat, right? So we had bags of full kernel wheat, and we'd grind it with this big gas powered grinder down in the garage. And that was my job as the oldest kid, right? I would grind the wheat the night before into these big or these plastic, kind of medium-sized plastic garbage cans, and lug them up to the bakery, so that when mom got up at dark 30, and started baking, all the flour and everything was ready to go. So and then in the morning, mom would get us up, and we had this commercial slicer, right? So we had this commercial slicer, and dad came up with this like sheet metal thing that you could take the sliced loaf and put it on and slide it into a bag, right? So it didn't all come apart. So in the morning, they'd get us up, get to, a good pretty early before school, and we would go into the bakery and take everything mom had been up, must be half the night, baking, and bag, tag, put it on racks. And then after she dropped us off at school, she'd go make all her deliveries around town in stores and farmers markets and that kind of thing.
That's cool. I'm happy we went there. I'm happy we had that part of the conversation, because I think that kind of sheds a lot of light into kind of who you are as a person and how you ended up, with that entrepreneurial mindset and that kind of, financial business acumen and stuff like that we can chat about. I also was curious about like your dad being a truck driver, because I feel like it's kind of that maybe that personality. I mean, I remember there was a point in my life where I thought, man, I'm going to be a truck driver because I just want to see things. I just want to every day see different places. And I realize it's not that glamorous all the time. I've done enough driving cross country to realize, okay, yeah, you can only drive across Iowa so many times before you, maybe you want to change your route a little bit or something like that. But I do see that personality. I see the consistency of that personality. Do you feel like kind of your personality is pretty similar to his, or what were the major differences, or what was it about his personality that inspired you?
So he didn't drive very much long haul. He did a lot of more local delivery kind of stuff. So he wasn't like gone for days on end quite a bit. But it is interesting. I love road trips, right? I love driving. I will drive. Like I have a rule, like if it's 8 hours or less, I just drive, right? Rather than fly. So maybe that rubbed off on me a bit. But I think the biggest thing about my dad that when I look back on it, my dad is one of those men that can fix or build or create anything, right? He is so handy. And unfortunately, I didn't inherit the level of talent he has with it, but I did, I think, inherit some resourcefulness to be able to, figure things out, solve problems, put things together, that kind of thing, which of course has been enormously helpful on boats because boats break constantly, right? So being able to fix and figure things out has been very, very helpful, and I think that's a direct inheritance from my dad.
It's interesting because there's kind of that mechanical problem solving mindset that some people have. And it sounds like your dad definitely had some of that. Mm-hmm. But then there's a lot of crossover because like I'm not particularly interested in mechanical stuff, to be honest with you. I don't really have any desire to necessarily fix mechanical things, but I like to figure out other types of problem solving, kind of, maybe more with the technology and, I'll do a podcast. I don't know how to do a podcast, but I'll start a podcast or figure out business challenges. Okay, I want to do this. How do I make that happen? And maybe you never put your hands on any or fix any kind of mechanical or whatever, but you use kind of the same mindset to help your business and stuff.
For sure. It's basically having an open mind, right? Being able to hold a problem in your mind and work through different solutions until you find something that works.
And I think, and it's that curiosity, right? I mean, you mentioned open mind. I tie that to the word curiosity, which is something that I think, honestly, our listeners can resonate with that, because if they're into adventure travel, if they're interested in hearing you and I have this conversation, it's because there's a certain level of curiosity and openness to the world. That's what adventure travel is to me. Whether that's, it doesn't necessarily need to be wingsuiting in the Swiss Alps or scuba diving with sharks off the coast of South Africa. It can be, anything that opens your mind, that feeds that sense of curiosity, which is why, everybody that I've interviewed on the show here comes with that. And which is why I'm doing this type of podcast. Because frankly, it's interesting to me because I'm curious.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to learn about sailing.
Kind of along those lines, right? We were out with some students on a boat last week here in the Sea of Cortez, and I don't know, my phone probably has 1,000 sunrises and sunsets pictures, right? Because you just see so many spectacular. But no matter how many I see or take pictures of, we were just at sunrise when we were sailing, and the sun coming up. The way it painted the clouds, and that's one of the things I love about adventure travel in general is no matter how many sunsets or sunrises I've seen, I'm still awestruck at the next one, right? And that's what I think part of it's all about. It's just this sense of being part of a planet that is absolutely spectacular, right? It just takes your breath away, even if you've seen it 1,000 times.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on the part of that that's the shared part. Because I definitely, I love to see amazing things. And I definitely realize in myself that if I can share it with somebody, and whether that's, somebody I love that's in my life full time or a client, if I'm guiding, I mean, my best memories of fishing. I was a fishing guide for quite a while. I had a balloon ride business for quite a while. All of my best experiences and all of my best memories involved other people that were as excited, maybe more excited than I was by what was going on, because it's the first time they had seen it. Maybe they catch a fish that's, in Montana, we've got a fish called a whitefish that's, it's a native fish. It's a beautiful fish, but it's not a trout. And I don't want to, it's not a sucker. And anybody that's listening to this that's into fishing, they're not necessarily the most exciting fish to catch unless it's the first fish you've ever caught on a fly. Unless you're in the Yellowstone River and there's a bald eagle flying over and it's an amazing day and you catch a big white fish and your guide is excited and you're taking pictures. And, I have memories of taking pictures of clients with whitefish that were some of my best memories, and if I'm out on my own fishing and I catch a whitefish, whatever, it's still nice to be there. But so I'm curious, you obviously work with clients, you're a teacher, right? You're instructing people on sailing. So tell me a little bit about kind of your thoughts and experiences with sharing experiences. I guess that's.
Oh, I think it's just absolutely huge. I think the whole reason I became a sailing instructor is, I developed just this passion for this cruising life, right? Just being out sailing to different places and being out on the water. And there's nothing quite like it, right? When you see something from the perspective of the water. or you're sailing along that beautiful sunrise that's off to the port side of the boat, those kinds of things. But you're totally right. Sharing those experiences, right? I've seen it 1,000 times. I'm still awestruck by it. But the fact that we had this couple on the boat who was having this experience with us, my wife and I, and that was the thrill, is to be able to share that with people, and that not just clients but family, right? I mean, I love getting my kids out on the boat, those kinds of things, because you want to share. You have this amazing experience and you just want to share that with people. And it's many years ago. I was just going to say, many years ago, I did some personal work and kind of identifying your core values, just some real introspective, get to know yourself kind of stuff. And the 3 core values that came out of that for me very, very strongly were freedom, adventure, and service. And so that totally makes sense with where I've gone in my life and the businesses that I'm into, right? And especially the sailing part of it, because it just completely lines up with my core values, to be able to serve people in this experience that's completely freeing and that's a total adventure. It just, it all just works together so well.
I suspect, I don't want to put words in your mouth, you tell me, but if you had, someone offered you, I don't know, $5,000 for a charter with some clients that wanted to learn about sailing, and, maybe they came from the Midwest somewhere, never been on a boat, or they offered, that's $5,000, or they offer you $8,000 to just go out on the boat by yourself, maybe move a boat from place to place type of thing, maybe a little bit more financial reward. Mm-hmm. What comes up for you if you have those 2 choices? I know what my choice would be. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's an easy one, Jason. I don't do deliveries, right? I don't do deliveries. So I'm a licensed captain. I can do deliveries, but I don't do deliveries. I only teach sailing. I have a passion for sharing this with people and for doing what I do. So it's not about money. Money's nice. We all like to make a good income at what we do, but it's not just about getting the top dollar for being on a boat. You're right. Yeah. I do a certain thing that I love to do, and that's what I do. I don't do deliveries. So I would turn that 8,000 down in a heartbeat.
Yeah, no, and I get it. And that's what's so great about the people that I'm having conversations with, the people that I've had conversations over the years. They all kind of, it's that mindset about the shared experiences is so valuable. Just to go back to when I was a fishing guide, there were days that I felt like I need to go check out a river. I need to go figure out what's going on. And I'd go out by myself and I'd fish all day. And frankly, probably hard to admit this to myself, but I just really didn't enjoy it that much. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I felt weird. I'm like, I'm out on the river on a Tuesday afternoon, catching trout on dry flies. The fishing's amazing. And all I could think about was, man, I wish I had somebody here to share this. Like, the fishing is amazing today, and I don't have any clients here, not because of the financial part. It's like, I just literally wanted to watch people catch fish more than I wanted to catch them myself, which is what makes a good guide. And I remember I used to invite friends. I'm like, hey, go fish. Like, they weren't into fishing. And I'm like, hey, just come with me. I'll row the boat. You just fish. I don't need to catch the fish. I literally just wanted to watch people catch fish because I could learn as much about what was going on in the river through somebody else. I didn't have to be the one with the rod in my hand, and it was just a lot more fun. So it kind of sounds similar.
I've done a lot of single handing over the years, and not that that's not a valuable experience, but I agree with you. It's only a certain amount, right? I really want to share those experiences with people. For sure. Yeah. It's pretty cool. So let's chat a little bit. Okay. So you mentioned, that was great. Thank you. You mentioned the show. You went to a boat show with a friend or a sailing show with a friend. Yeah. I went to the Portland boat show. What happened there? What happened from that point? Okay. So I went to the Portland boat show in Portland, Oregon. Just a random invitation. A friend called up, said, hey, you want to go to the boat show tomorrow? And, we went. So they had a booth there for American sailing courses. Sailing instruction. And it just caught my attention, and I grabbed the flyer and signed up about a week later for a basic keelboat course on the Columbia River in February. Right. So it was wet and nasty and cold. But I had a blast, right? So like, okay, I think the sailing thing is really something I want to do. And So I did some research, and then a few months later, I went down to Belize and took 3 more ASA American sailing courses. So kind of finished out the basic certifications that most people get from American sailing down there. And
were you already kind of the mindset that I want to do this as a business, so I'm going to take these courses to get to a point of business, or was it just I enjoy it, I want to learn it?
No, at that point, I really wanted to just learn what I was doing so I could get a boat and take off and go cruising, right? Take off and go sailing. So I had no intention of a business at that point. I was working at a pretty good sales job in corporate sales, and was also developing a real estate development. And so I had some other irons in the fire business wise, but really it was just a personal, there was a lot of stress in my life at that time as well. And I think that was a contributing factor, the idea of just being on a boat, disconnected from all of it, sailing somewhere beautiful. I think I was ready for that. So that's what kind of drove me that way.
Did you have any romantic relationships in your life at that point? And if so, how did that all fit together? Because I've got some stories and connections in my head between romance and relationships and adventure. So I'm curious, how did it work for you?
Yeah, did I mention I had some stress in my life at the
time? That's what triggered me to ask the question.
Oh. So yeah, it was a tumultuous time, a separation and divorce and teenage kids, and just all of that as well. So definitely was some stress around that.
I sensed that for some reason, John. I sensed that, and that's why I wanted to go there.
Yep.
All right. So what would you like to? Because I'm curious about that connection between adventure, freedom. You mentioned as one of your values. And relationships, because and this isn't a relationship podcast per se, but I think that people listening to this can either resonate or maybe there's some value or something you can share, because I definitely have my own ideas. I'm traveling full time. I've been traveling full time for 2.5 years, trying to figure out how do I make that part of it work. So
right, yeah, absolutely. So there's an event that kind of was a turning point for me. So I mentioned I did some personal work, some spiritual work. This was all during that same kind of early to mid 2000s time frame, right? And so I'd been sailing, getting out as much as I could for a couple of years, 2-3 years, and I met a guy named Jim. He was given a presentation at a sailing club on sailing in Mexico, and I chatted with him afterwards, and I ended up going down and sailing with him for 2 weeks here on the Pacific coast of Mexico, and when on the boat, we became friends. And so over the next 10 years, I spent anywhere from 2 to 8 weeks a year with Jim cruising in Mexico. So early on in that process, I went to my boss, who's also a friend of mine, and I said, "Hey, here's the deal. I'm going to take all 4 weeks of my vacation at once." And of course, he freaked out. "Well, I can't do that." "Okay, but I'm gonna." I said, "Oh, by the way, I'm not going to tell anyone I'm on vacation. Right? You're the only one that's going to know. I'm not going to tell anybody I work with. I'm not going to tell any customers. No out of office email. No out of office voicemails. Right? Nobody's going to know I'm gone except you." And then I said, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to go to Mexico when I do this." And after he got done freaking out, we figured it out. So I left and I came down here to Mexico. And I back then it was a 3G dongle, right? The broadband, so you plug in your laptop. So I picked one of those up at the local Telcel and added Mexico to my Verizon plan. And I spent a month sailing down the Pacific coast of Mexico, and nobody I worked with, customers, had any idea that I wasn't sitting in the office in Portland. And so the wheels are turning, right? And so the turning point came, we were in Mazatlan, into a marina in Mazatlan. And I had this call set up with a customer and 3 or 4 of my co-workers with the company I worked for, and 3 or 4 of the customer reps, and we were finalizing this negotiation on this supply contract. And here I am, I'm sitting on the deck of the boat in Mazatlan, this beautiful marina and inside a resort in Mazatlan, my back against the mast. I'm in shorts with a polo on, right? And barefoot, laptop in my lap, and a cold Pacifico on the deck next to me. And we spent, an hour or so on this call. We wrapped everything up. I went up to I was sitting there, and as I hung up disconnected the call, I'm like, okay, I need to change my life, right? I can I can provide value and do business from literally anywhere. And this was back then, before Starlink, before, any of the stuff we have now.
Before being a
and
digital
so,
nomad was cool, right?
yeah, exactly. And so it took a few years, but that was the turning point. That was like, okay, I gotta change things. 4 weeks a year vacation isn't gonna cut it, right? That's just not gonna work. And so that freedom piece.
You such a great way to do it that it comes up because I've been doing the digital nomad thing for a couple of years, and I'm in the social media groups. I see people, oh, I want to do this. How do I do this? How do I do this? My boss this, my boss that, my job da 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 da. But I love your approach was like, hey boss, you're not, it's my vacation time. So it's just my vacation time. I can take my vacation time and not do anything, or I can take my vacation time and continue to work. And so the clients will be happy, da da da. And it's an opportunity for you to both figure out if you want to do it, if it works for you, but also to show to your boss that, hey, look, I can do this. It makes sense. It worked well, as opposed to, showing up at the office on a Friday morning and saying, hey, boss, I really want to work remotely. Can I please work remotely? I want to start March 1st and I'm going to be traveling the world, da da da, because that's overwhelming. Right. For the boss, sure. It should be overwhelming for you if you've never done it. I mean, I can relate to why you think that it's a good idea. But what you did was like, so anybody listening to this that's thinking, man, I would love to go do that. That's a really good approach, is do it on your vacation. And if you have to start like doing it on your vacation from home, okay, whatever. Just show to the boss that you can still keep doing things, because it's pretty great. If you are sitting somewhere you really enjoy, if you have a little bit of discipline to actually go and do the job, during the day or whatever, and it is an important part of it, but your value of life can just go way up in a heartbeat. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, I can't believe I'm traveling the world. I can't believe I'm in Bangkok, or I'm in Malaysia or Bali or wherever it is. I can still do my work. I'm happy about where I'm at. Because if you're just sitting at home in Milwaukee, and there's no knock on Milwaukee, but if you're in Milwaukee, going to work every day, it can be kind of a grind. So it sounds like you found
absolutely. This whole period of my life I refer to as kind of my awakening, right? Yeah. And the period prior to that I refer to as my zombie years, where I was just plodding along and going to work every day and doing what everybody thinks they're supposed to do. And so that with all the personal work and just all the circumstances, I just woke up. I became aware of the world around me, and that I could mold it any way I wanted it.
Yeah, you can do whatever the F you want to do.
That's right.
When you realize, oh man, I can do whatever the F I want to do. I'll share with you, because it's relevant to the sailing. The last 3 years my ex-wife is a wonderful, love her to death. And our direction, our desires, I've got that value of shared adventures and experiences. And I spent the last 3 years of my marriage watching sailing videos on YouTube, just like, man, I know nothing about sailing, but it was like, oh, it just was so incredibly romantic. And I would say to her, I'm like, hey, let's buy a sailboat. I wasn't trying to get away from her. It wasn't that. I mean, she's a great person. But I'd be like, let's buy a sailboat, and the three of us can travel, and we'll do a travel vlog and with our kid. And and to her, that sounded like the worst idea that she could possibly imagine. She's like, are you kidding me? There's no way I want to be on a boat with you and Jackson 24/7. And I don't blame her. I get it. I'm not that easy. So I get it. But yes, it was that just kind of that miserable point in my life where I just knew I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to get out and explore. I wasn't working so much in the travel business anymore. I didn't have as many opportunities. And it was, frankly, it was painful. And then, after the divorce and after a couple of years of trying to give myself the permission to go, I finally went. And it was, and I'm in that same spot. I went through some personal development stuff as well. Kind of that awakening, like, okay, so this is what you want. What's in the way? Well, myself, my stories in my head. Yep. And now, I know my ex wasn't real happy when I made the decision, but my relationship with my son is much better because my relationship with myself is much better.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I get that. And do you have, just curious, have you had the opportunity to create new relationships, or are you just like, man, I'm doing the solo thing and I don't know, what's your status in life now? Do you find it difficult to connect with people when you're going back and forth between Canada or between the I guess the States, right?
Yeah, U.S. Washington. Yep.
Yeah, Washington, right, and Mexico. So what's that like?
Yeah, so I do have great relationships in my life today. There was a long period of time where I was kind of a lone wolf, just kind of on my own mostly. I was technically in a relationship at the time that was sort of fluid. But then the love of my life came out of the woodwork here about 4 years ago or so, a little less than that, and so we have a fantastic relationship in my life today that I get to share all of these things with, and so yeah, turned out just amazing.
And that's why I wanted to ask, because I don't know your whole deal, but I suspected that would be the case. So what was different? Like when you're living the adventure life, you're doing your thing, and it's time to select someone else to be a part of that. What's the one piece of advice that you'd give to somebody listening?
Just be completely transparent, right? When Amber and I started dating early on, I basically said, hey, this sailing thing's like a pretty big deal, right? This is a pretty big thing in my life. And so she pretty quickly found herself out on a boat taking some ASA courses, and I had an open spot on one of the classes I was teaching. Mm-hmm. So we did a 101 course on a little lake in Vancouver, Washington, because this was a 103, 104, which is a coastal cruising and bareboat cruising combination course. So she had to get that basic keelboat done. So we did that on a lake, and then she came up, jumped on the boat, and so I knew I had her hooked, right? The first morning we were anchored in this beautiful spot called Echo Bay on Susha Island up in the San Juan Islands in Washington. And we were up early. I started making coffee, and she went up on deck. And I was making the coffee, and all of a sudden she sticks her head in the companionway, and she's just giddy like a little kid, right? She's, oh my God, you gotta come and see this, right? And so I stick my head up there, and it was just the most picture perfect vision you could imagine, right? Water was like glass. The sun was coming up behind Mount Baker on the horizon. And just the light at that moment was reflecting Mount Baker and the sky on the water. There's other boats, and it was just absolutely beautiful. And she was so excited. She's like, it's the most beautiful thing I think I've ever seen in my life. I'm like, aha. Okay, she's
I can see how you guys bond. I can see how you both bonded over that. I get that, because it's that, wow, she likes the same thing I like, and she's excited, and I'm excited. And, it's interesting because in the kind of relationship world, the coaching, the whatever you listen to about relationships or books you read, quite often they'll say it's really important that both parties have their own interests, their own group of friends, their own this, that, and this. And I get that for 80% of the world, that probably makes sense. It's not necessarily bad advice. But what I've noticed, if you're the adventurous type that is really passionate about sailing or traveling or whatever it is, that advice might not be the best advice. Maybe it's not necessarily a good idea to seek out somebody that has their own interests, their own group of friends, their own kind of direction, because it's really complicated when you're changing locations or you're doing something quite dynamic. So I just kind of feel like it's much more important to find, like you said, be transparent, open, honest, like, hey, this is my thing. This is what I do. If you can get excited about what I do, then great. If you can't get excited about what I do, it's probably not going to work very well. So what do you think?
I agree. I think overlap is important, right? I do think it's important for individuals to be individuals, right? The best relationship are two completely adjusted, mature individuals who come together and synergize, right? So I do think that's important, but I think there does have to be overlap, right? If I'm into something that she's totally 100% not in, right, then that can create some conflict, right? I mean, because we all have a limited amount of time, so we're going to go spend time doing this, or are we not? So, Amber is not as passionate about sailing as I am. She loves it. She enjoys it, but it's not like, right, her all dying passion like it is for me. And so there's an overlap, and that works, right? She doesn't go on every class with me. She goes on a lot of them, but she doesn't go out on
Right.
every
But
class,
did she
right?
live, is she in Mexico with you?
She is, yeah, she is right now. There are times when she goes back up to our home in Washington, and we've got the little farm thing going on. We've got chickens and that kind of thing. So that's her passion, it's the plants and the growing things, and that's not my passion. I like it. I enjoy it. Right. I enjoy helping her with it. So I think that overlap is where it's important. We don't have to both love the same thing, but we've at least got to be able to overlap on the things we each individually love. Does that make sense?
And yeah, it does. And maybe the kind of the ability to embrace what your partner loves, whether you love it the same way, and just appreciate it and see it as a positive in the relationship, as opposed to he's gone all the time or she's gone all the time, and she would he would rather go fishing than spend time with me, or that constant conflict. Because if one of you feels like you need to give up what you're passionate about in order to, for the other person to have what they're passionate about, that can be, that can be a bit of a challenge. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about relationship stuff. We've talked a lot about a bunch of, but I want to really understand, this is the opportunity for you to share with our listeners. Okay, now that we're here, what are you doing exactly? You're obviously doing classes. What should our listeners know about kind of what you're doing with your business and in your life right now, so they can figure out if it makes sense for them to connect with you and maybe start their own journey?
Absolutely. So I've been a professional sailing instructor. So there's much more to the story, but we'll flash forward here. I've been a sailing instructor since 2016, so about 8 years now, primarily with American Sailing. And there's a couple of things over the years that I noticed, and that is there's a movement in the sailing instruction industry, so to speak, kind of for expediency. So people like these 1 week learn to sail programs. And I've taught mostly those over the years, where they're doing multiple certifications for American Sailing. So some of the ones I've talked about, we'll do them all in 1 week in a location. But what I've noticed over the years is, and students will even tell me this at the end of the course, is that they got through the course, they passed the written test, but they still don't have the confidence, and they're still not really competent in terms of actually knowing what they're doing. And so when we created Cruise and Learn Sailing International, what we were seeking to do was kind of address some of these types of problems, in that how can we share this experience with people but develop competence, which will make them confident, which will make them go out and do more with it, right? And so we were looking for a program that still encompassed that 1 week adventure, right? Because it is amazing, right? That week on the water is amazing. Amazing progress happens when you kind of immerse yourself in it. And so what we created is what we call the Sailing Immersion Program, and it's basically a 12-month program that is built around that 1 week adventure. And so, as I mentioned, I've taught American Sailing courses quite a bit, but I got associated with an organization called Nautic Ed, which is another sail training system, and it really addresses a lot of the problems that we have out there. So without getting too technical, right, there are sailing training standards, but there's really no accountability to those standards, which means there's not much of a standard, right? There's a lot of pressure on schools and instructors to kind of rubber stamp people through, because they paid a lot of money to come do this, so they kind of expect
paid a lot of money. They've got 1 week. They kind of expect to go home with certification.
Expect to go home with a certification in a book, right? As I refer to it, a little sticker in a book, right? That's kind of what is pretty common out there, is we get a little sticker in a book. And so my question is always, well, do you want a little sticker in a book, or do you want to actually know how to be a competent sailor and skipper, right? So we created the immersion program. It's a 12-month program. We use the Nautic Ed platform. Nautic Ed has done some pretty amazing things. They've leveraged technology. So they have this multimedia online knowledge and theory training system that's self-paced, all online, multimedia, et cetera. And so we can then, over the 12 months, you can just work through these online training programs from Nautic Ed. We also, the other thing that they've done that's just incredible is they've tied in virtual reality. So believe it or not, we can do sailing instruction now on virtual reality with the Oculus Quest. I've even got a program that we're working on where if you don't have a headset, we'll loan you, right? We'll loan you one if you sign up for the immersion program. We'll loan you a headset so that you can we have docking training, we have sailing training, we have racing, all of this in virtual, right? So again, during this 12-month program, it can plug into the theory and knowledge training on the Nautic Ed platform, virtual reality training, and then we're tying in networking, a private Facebook group, a weekly meeting with instructor-led meeting. So you have access to an instructor every week through a Zoom. We call it a sundowner, right? It's kind of a happy hour, bring a drink. And you can ask questions. We can go over any of the course material that you might have questions about. We're also going to bring guest speakers in, things like that. And so we're tying in that networking piece. And then it all kind of culminates with that 1 week, 7-day cruise and learn adventure, either up in the Pacific Northwest in the San Juan Islands or the Gulf Islands in British Columbia, or down here in La Paz and Sea Cortez. And so we're adding a whole bunch of value to that 1 week, right?
Yeah, I get it.
So the other thing with Nautic Ed that was important is that standard piece. So Nautic Ed, their training program, the U.S. Coast Guard adopted some sailing standards in 2017. And an organization called the National Association of State Boating Law Administrators was asked to go out and basically certify what sailing training organizations meet those standards. And Nautic Ed's the only one, right, that has that certification, that they meet the American national standards for sail training that the Coast Guard adopted in 2017. So and so they're getting an internationally recognized certification that's accepted by charter companies worldwide because it meets this American national standards for sail training requirement. So that's super important. So we have this immersion program with all these extra value that we built in, but we also wanted to make it accessible and affordable. And so what we did is we said, okay, well, what are people paying for these 1 week learn to sail programs in general, whether they do it close to home or they travel, what do they cost? And then we also said, well, okay, to do all the other things we're doing here, because we're also going to give some, if you're in our local area in Washington or Oregon, we're going to offer some local sailing opportunities as well to get out on boats, day sailing. And so if somebody had to put all of these pieces together individually, what would that cost? And so what we came up with is something I think people are pretty familiar with today as a subscription-based program. So the immersion program takes that cost and splits it up into 12 zero-interest payments. So somebody can
which is a benefit to people as well, yeah.
Makes it affordable, makes it accessible.
Yep.
And by the estimates of all the cost of all these individual pieces, it's actually over that first year or maybe 2 years where you're learning how to sail, it's probably a 40 to 60% savings over what it would cost to build it all individually, to take the individual courses or to buy the holding costs of buying a boat or, sailing clubs, yacht clubs, all the different ways you could get out on the water. If you take all those costs, it's a significant cost reduction. And we're able to do that because as a subscription-based service, we can build groups a lot easier than the typical school can, which allows us to drive some cost efficiencies and be able to drive our prices to where they're very affordable.
Very cool.
Yeah, so it's a pretty unique program. I'm super excited about it. We intend to, right now, our local sailing area. So we have kind of two programs. One's for Oregon and Washington folks that are close enough to go do the day sailing. The other is for people everywhere else that just doesn't include the day sailing piece at a bit of a discount for that. And then eventually, though, we do intend to expand our local operations into other boating communities and offer that day sailing opportunity other places as well.
So if somebody's listening to this and they're like, I've never even been on a sailboat and I'd like to see if it feels like something I'd be interested in, and they're too old to go to Seventh-day Adventist youth camp. What do you suggest? Because I feel like someone I had a conversation with said, you can go down to a yacht club and just say, hey, I'm available. I'd like to learn a little bit. And oftentimes, and I don't know if I'm talking out my butt, but people let you on their boat if you're willing to just do a little bit of work. It was like that with ballooning, with my hot air balloon ride business. Oftentimes, if somebody came to me and said, hey, I want to learn about ballooning, I'd like, great, show up at 6 a.m. and we'll put you to work and you'll learn about ballooning. And every once in a while, you might get an opportunity to fly in the balloon. And some people would just stay for years and just keep coming every time because they just enjoyed, maybe some of them decided they wanted to get a license and learn how to fly and buy a balloon, and others just like to come hang out and spend time. Is it similar with sailing? Is that something somebody realistically could do?
Yeah, it is. So in our local area in Washington and Oregon, right, we're going to have that opportunity available. You can come out on a boat for half a day or a day or whatever. Outside that area, that's that networking piece that's included in the immersion program. So, so we're actually going to reach out and try to create some connections for you in your local area that you can then tap into and get out on basically get out on boats with private boaters and just have an experience.
I see the value of your network and your program, the subscription program, and I suspect if someone's not quite there yet, they can also. I have a feeling there's probably Facebook groups or social media groups for sailing groups where somebody could go in and say, "Look, I want to get into this. Does anybody need any help? How can I get involved?" And is that the real low barrier to entry way to do it?
Well, and I think what we can help with too is vetting, right? You don't necessarily want to get stuck on a boat with just anybody, right? It's
like that with hot air balloons as well. Trust me.
Yeah. So I think we can help with the vetting to make sure you're getting out with somebody that's actually going to be of value for you, right? So I think we can help with that too. Cool. Boaters are always helpful, right? Boaters are awesome. I'm sure it's similar in you mentioned ballooning and some other activities that are similar. It's kind of a knit group and they love helping. And so I think that's totally possible to do that. The other thing too, being subscription based, right? You can cancel your subscription anytime. So you start the Nautic Ed courses and you get out on a boat once and you go, not for me, right? You can cancel. You might only spend a few $100 instead of, you book a 7-day trip in La Paz and you spent $4,000 plus travel expenses to find out
you don't like the first day.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't like boats.
I don't like this, right? Now what am I going to do? So I think that's another advantage.
Yep. We're not going to discuss specifics of your subscription because things might change before this even airs. I don't know.
Sure.
We've got your website link in the show notes. So I'm assuming that if someone were to click on that link, it wouldn't take them very long to figure out, get more information, connect with you and your team to kind of figure out if this is something, because the podcast is not an infomercial, but it's important. It's interesting what you're doing. So that's why I wanted to have that conversation. I want to ask you one question that came up because I remember it coming up when I was sitting on the couch looking at sailing videos. This idea that sometimes people want to sail across large, vast expanses of water, and maybe it's a couple. And apparently it's nice to have 3 people on a boat when you're traveling long distance. And I remember came across somewhere where you could go volunteer, sit on the boat and you just basically sit there at night, I guess, and just make sure that nothing weird happens. So I don't know if you have to know that much about sailing, but is that something realistically somebody could volunteer and say, look, I've got a couple months. I'd be happy to sit on the boat with you across the Atlantic Ocean. Is that really something somebody could do that has no real sailing experience, or is that just
it is, but I don't think it's quite that simple. So there are a lot of crew there are a lot of crew finder sites, right? With and I kind of joke about this. What you'll find in the sailing community is there are a lot of old guys with boats by themselves, right? And so they go on these crew finder sites to try and find crew to help them get across the passage or whatever the case may be.
Two young ladies in their early 20s that want to go on an adventure. Yeah, I can see.
You have to sift through those sites carefully because there's definitely some of that going on. So usually though, they're asking for some experience. I mean, it's possible to go on with no experience, but they want some experience so that, you're not halfway across the ocean and now you've got somebody who wants off the boat, right? There's nowhere to go.
Well, yeah, no, that's true. You have to know what you're signing up for. And also they probably want to do some sort of vetting around personality because that's a small space.
Yes.
to be on with somebody.
Be careful who you get stuck on a boat.
Or they might end up on the other side of the ocean with one fewer crew member.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it doesn't go that far.
Okay. Well, that's something to avoid. John, I know there's a lot more to your story, and we've covered a lot of things. What did I miss? What do you wish I would have asked you that you want to make sure our guests know, either about your story? I mean, we talked a little bit about your business, but what do we need to talk about before we wrap up?
I think the main thing is if you have a dream, right? If you've been watching those YouTube videos we were talking about, and you just dream of getting out there, find a way to do it. Take some action. Yeah. Do something, right? Even if it's in your local waters, right? Just go find a way to taste that experience and decide whether to go further or if a taste was enough. Just do something. That's always my advice. Take action. Do stuff.
That's a super. That's the big one. That is the big one in life, is if you want to do something, if you know you want to do something, if you know something's going to happen, if you're like, maybe it's a relationship, a change, whatever, if you know something's going to happen. I remember the last video I listened to, that course of 3 years, was somebody talking about, if you know you're going to do something, if you know something's going to happen, you're committed to making it happen, why wait? What are you waiting for?
Yep.
I mean, that
something
was
I talk about.
That was the last video I watched in the house.
Yeah. Right. Go do something. Something I talk about a lot, right? There's about 780,000 hours in a 90-year lifespan, right? I'm coming up on 55 years old. So, I've used well over half my time. So we have to take action. There's no time to waste.
Yeah. John, thank you. There's no better way to wrap up the conversation. You brought a lot of value to our listeners today and me personally. And that's why I do this, is I'm just curious. I want to meet people. I want to have conversations, and hopefully other people will want to listen. If they do, great. If they don't, that's okay. I'm still going to keep having these conversations. So John, thanks for giving me about an hour of your time to come on and just chat. Look forward to our paths crossing soon, and maybe I'll learn something about sailing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jason. It's been a whole lot of fun chatting with you. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks, John. You have a great day. Bye.
You too.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.